So Warfield, the question of who influences him and
Yes.
who is he influenced, who does he in turn influence?
Right.
Well, this generation question is interesting because there's overlap, right?
Yeah, there is.
Warfield is a student of Charles Hodge, who was a second generation. He was among the second generation of professors because he was a student of Archibald Alexander and Samuel Miller. The first two professors. Hodge is the third professor at Princeton. Now, by the time you get to Warfield, you've got a bunch of professors, right? You're up to 10 or 15, maybe even 20. And by the time Machen comes along, it's a larger group, right, of men who are teaching at the seminary,
it might
who
have been
are
28,
on the faculty.
28 or 29.
Even during Warfield's time,
Right.
it's on the way to getting there.
Yeah.
Right. And then Voss is brought on as during Warfield's tenure. So Warfield teaches literally until the day he dies. Warfield has a heart attack on the front lawn of the Voss home. But then he recovers and goes back to teaching, but then he has another heart attack and dies at the age of 69.
But 70. At that age, he had influenced
how many students did he have? That's interesting.
Right.
I know
hundreds and hundreds at least.
Yeah. Hodge was teaching for 50 years and it was in the thousands. And beyond Presbyterianism, remember that Princeton is one of those schools that is a magnet for evangelicals broadly. So James Pettigrew Boyce, who is the founder of Southern Theological Seminary in the Southern Baptist Convention, he's a student of Hodge. He's a contemporary. He's an earlier student of Hodge. Warfield is a later student of Hodge because Hodge taught for 50 plus years at Princeton, right? So Warfield is influenced by both those who taught him at the university, at the college, and then at the seminary, which were distinct institutions, although at that point they're cross-fertilizing one another.
Right.
So that Charles Hodge is on the board of trustees of the college, although it's a distinct institution with its own board.
Yes.
And its own faculty.
Always has been.
Although, as I said, at that early stage, they were sharing. In other words, professors at the seminary will often teach classes at the at the college, and vice versa.
Sure.
That may continue even now. That's similar, but they're distinct. They have their own boards, their own administration, their own faculty. And Warfield goes to both the college and the seminary, right? So he's got both, however whatever. So that, and he's a student of Hodge. And he's also a student of A.A. Hodge and Caspar Wister Hodge, who are sons of Charles Hodge. Now, by the time you get to Machen, I think you've got a third generation, and you've got a grandson of Charles Hodge, who also is Caspar Wister Hodge.
Oh, yes. I knew that's what I thought. I was confused because I knew a Caspar Wister was. There's two Caspar Wister Hodges. Okay.
There's the son of Charles, and then I think there's the grandson of Charles.
Sure. And he was the one that Machen consulted with.
Right.
When Machen was deliberating whether to take the chair of apologetics. Obviously, he never got it because it wasn't confirmed at General Assembly. Because the president
that's a whole interesting story.
Against him.
And Warfield fits into that because, as you may remember, Machen, who writes regularly to his mother, makes the comment at the funeral of Warfield that when his body is carried out of the chapel, Old Princeton goes with him.
That was 5 years earlier.
Yeah, that's an interesting comment to make. And I think it's almost prescient. I'm going to change that to it. It was absolutely spot on.
It was. I wonder if I suspect Machen meant that, but I suspect that the implication wasn't as much that New Princeton was modernist or liberal, although it was something else. But I think after after the reorganization of the board in 29, which would have been 8 years following Warfield's death, I think that statement to his mother takes on a different life. Not one that's contrary to the original intent, but my suspicion is that it grew.
Yeah, it's an expansion. It's, and you know as well as I that actually the life of classical liberalism at Princeton is actually short-lived. It very quickly becomes the haven of neo-orthodoxy. Right, Bardianism becomes more of a influence at Princeton than did classical liberalism.
Absolutely.
Liberalism has a heyday for a very short while at Princeton. And even today, you go to Princeton and there's a plethora of views that are taught. You know, my professor for the Edwards PhD seminar often would complain about one of his colleagues because the colleague was a Bardian and actually was an expert in Bart. And my professor was not a Bardian.
Yeah.
And the academic dean made these two men co-teach a course on the introduction to systematic theology.
It's very dialectical.
And it was because one week you would have Bart's view or this scholar's view of Bart, and if I gave the name, many would know who he was. And then there is my professor who's not a Bardian, and so they would be conflicting with each other. And on top of that, you have within the Bardians, you have a conflict between this man who co-taught a course with my professor who taught the Edwards course. You have him in conflict with another scholar who is a Bardian. So it's interesting what happens earlier in the days of Old Princeton. I think you had variety, but you had confessional continuity among the various professors, just as you did at Westminster, right?
Yeah, entirely.
With the original founding faculty had their differences, but they were cohesive in a way that Princeton could never claim to be now, right? I mean, it's Princeton Theological Seminary, which is an august institution with lots of money, I suppose, and lots of property. Although compared to Harvard, it's not. But so it's interesting to see the dynamics at work. So there's a painting of Warfield, just as there is of Hodge, on the walls at the Robert Speer Library. But basically, they're put in a room staring at each other. And have little ongoing influence to the current faculty and students, unless you're into Old Princeton.
Sure.
Then like my friend Paul Kios Helseth, who would travel from his school, which is Northeastern. I think it's now University, but I think it may still be called the college. It's the college in Minnesota that Billy Graham was president of at one time. So Paul is a scholar of Old Princeton. So he treks back to Princeton to do work in the Speer Library, and he used to stay at the Charles Erdman Hall, or whatever they would call it, where guest scholars could come and stay while they did their research. If you know anything, you know that Erdman was not only was Speer, but Erdman was a nemesis of Machen.